They called it the Golden Age, when the stars didn't just shine, they burned. When faces became icons, smiles were crafted like sculpture, and the word beauty became a contract. But beneath the spotlight's glow, there was a quieter current. Hidden procedures, stitched secrets, and operations whispered about only in the velvet-draped backrooms of Beverly Hills clinics. Some of the most unforgettable faces in cinema weren't born that way. This isn't just a countdown. This is an unraveling. Because these surgeries didn't just shape cheekbones or lift brows. They transformed careers, rewrote destinies, and in some cases, broke the very people they promised to perfect. And number 4, it's a story so tragic, so buried, that even her co-stars refused to speak about it for decades. These are the 10 secret surgeries that transformed Golden Age stars forever, and the scars they left behind. Number 10, the hidden cost. Beauty tricks and surgeries that stole more than they gave. By the 1950s, Hollywood had become a factory, and the product wasn't just films, it was faces. Aspirants came off the train at Union Station wide-eyed, hopeful, and by the time they were studio-ready, they had new names, new accents, and often new faces. Before plastic surgery became sophisticated and accessible, early stars endured terrifying techniques to achieve the look. Cheekbone padding with beeswax, hairline electrolysis to create higher brows, even tooth extraction. Yes, removing molars to hollow the face and create that prized, chiseled look under the studio lights. The practice was widespread, but rarely documented. Executives made suggestions behind closed doors: soften the jaw, lift the eyes, change the nose, suggestions that weren't optional. Studio heads, like MGM's Louis B. Mayer, operated like gods, capable of transforming Norma Jean into Marilyn, Frances Gumm into Judy Garland, Lucille Fay Lesieur into Joan Crawford, and the transformation often included scalpels. Sometimes it worked. Other times, it left them chasing the ghost of their younger selves. These weren't one-time procedures. Many of the stars, especially women, faced unrelenting pressure to maintain the image. As they aged, the interventions escalated. Multiple facelifts, neck lifts, skin tightening through painful chemical peels, even silicone injections that weren't FDA approved. We open our list with the nameless many: the chorus girls, the second leads, the would-be starlets whose transformations were subtle, sometimes grotesque, and almost always required. They disappeared from the credits, but their faces linger in background scenes, holding back pain behind false eyelashes. They were the prototype for what Hollywood would perfect in others, but they paid the price quietly. And next, the transformations grow even bolder. Number 9. Jocelyn Wildenstein, the woman who turned her face into a feline fantasy. She wasn't an actress, not in the traditional sense, but her presence on the Hollywood periphery was so surreal, so mythic, that she became a cautionary tale whispered from red carpets to sound stages. Jocelyn Wildenstein wasn't born into stardom. She married into it. A socialite with a fascination for the exotic and a desire to be desired, Jocelyn fell into the arms and the vast fortune of billionaire art dealer Alec Wildenstein. But it wasn't wealth she truly craved. It was attention and love. And in her eyes, those things were earned, sculpted, carved like marble into beauty. Jocelyn's descent into surgical obsession began not with a bang, but a whisper. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, long after the Golden Age had flickered out, Hollywood was still clinging to its last icons. The new faces were tighter, higher, smoother, and Jocelyn believed the key to eternal passion was transformation, not just subtle enhancements, but complete metamorphosis. She began altering her face to mimic the features of a wild cat. Why? Because Alec, her husband, admired the look of lions. So Jocelyn pursued a vision of feline femininity: wide-set eyes, lifted brows, high cheekbones, plumped lips, and a taut jawline that strained against nature's design. Her skin began to lose elasticity, but instead of stopping, she pushed further. Cheek implants, multiple facelifts, eyelid surgeries, collagen injections, procedures stacked on top of each other like fragile cards. And with each session, the resemblance to a cat grew more uncanny. and less human. By the 1990s, her face became a tabloid sensation. Cruel headlines dubbed her Catwoman, Bride of Wildenstein, even the woman who destroyed her face. Yet she maintained it was all for love, a kind of devotion only the warped mirrors of old Hollywood could understand. Jocelyn never apologized. She once said, "I've always been like this. My look is based on a Persian cat." But behind her defense was a sad echo of a time when women were told, explicitly or implicitly, that to be adored, they had to be changed. She became a punchline. But what she really was a living relic of a twisted belief that perfection was never enough. Number 8. Phyllis Diller, the comedian who laughed through every lift. Before Joan Rivers, before Tina Fey, before comedy became a genre that allowed women to be sharp and loud and brash, there was Phyllis Diller. She wasn't just funny. She was bold. Her laugh was thunderous, her outfits absurd, her timing impeccable. But behind the self-deprecating jokes and the wild wigs was a woman who, by her own admission, rebuilt herself, one surgery at a time. Diller didn't enter show business until she was nearly 40. By then she was a mother of 5, a former advertising copywriter, and someone who had spent her life being told she wasn't pretty. So when fame finally knocked, Phyllis wasn't content with simply being funny. She wanted to be beautiful, or at least closer to it, and unlike her peers, she didn't keep it secret. Phyllis underwent 15 plastic surgeries over the course of her life that we know of. Facelifts, nose jobs, eye lifts, liposuction, cheek implants, breast augmentation, you name it. She even joked that her plastic surgeon should be given credit in her films. And in 1993, she went on 2020, proudly showing before and after pictures, naming every procedure, and breaking one of the final taboos of Golden Age glamour: honesty. She said, "I've had it all done. I've been sewn up, turned over, and sent out." And people laughed. But it was also a confession, a painful one. The surgeries weren't about vanity alone, they were about agency. Phyllis had made a career of poking fun at her looks. Her fake eyelashes, her fake laugh, her fictitious husband, Bang. But deep down, she wanted control. And in a world that told women they had an expiration date, plastic surgery became her rebellion. The irony, even with a new face, the world still called her ugly. But she didn't care, because Phyllis Diller had something more powerful than beauty. She had the mic and the guts to tell the truth, even when that truth was pulled, lifted, and stitched together behind a hospital curtain. She turned her body into a battleground, and then turned that into a punchline. Number 7, Joan Rivers, the woman who sculpted her career and her face. Before she became the high priestess of red carpet roasts and late-night jabs, Joan Rivers was simply Joan Malinsky, a Barnard graduate with a dream bigger than her face could carry, or so she was told. In an era when funny women were supposed to be cute, not commanding, Joan was neither. She was brilliant, but brilliance, in Hollywood, often needed packaging, especially if it came with a Brooklyn accent and a nose that directors called too Jewish for primetime. So she made a choice, 1,000 small ones, over decades. It started in college, rhinoplasty, quiet, unacknowledged, the subtle chisel that gave her the illusion of mainstream beauty. But it didn't stop there. As her career began to build in the early 60s, Joan understood something painfully clear. She would have to evolve to stay in the game. She had eyelid surgery in 1965, still early in her career, an almost unheard of move for a young woman in comedy. But Joan wasn't interested in staying in her lane. She didn't want to be the funny sidekick. She wanted center stage. And if that meant re-engineering herself, so be it. Facelifts followed. Brow lifts, neck tightening, liposuction, Botox, of course, chin tucks, dental work, veneers. And she didn't keep it quiet. Joan Rivers was among the first major entertainers to own her plastic surgery. She joked about it on air, wrote about it in her books, turned it into a brand. But the laughter never quite masked the truth. Joan was at war with time. She once quipped, "I've had so much plastic surgery. When I die, they will donate my body to Tupperware." But beneath the punchline was pain, because Joan, for all her fame, was still chasing something no scalpel could grant: acceptance. She wanted to be loved not just for her talent, but for her image. And every nip and tuck was another step closer to that unreachable ideal. Her face changed. Her voice stayed sharp. But the cost was written in scar tissue and lonely recovery rooms. Joan Rivers didn't just rewrite the rules for women in comedy, she rewrote her own face, line by line, until there was almost no trace of Joan Malinsky left. Number 6. Jean Harlow. The Platinum Tragedy. They called her the Platinum Blonde. Jean Harlow was the first of her kind. An electric shock of sex appeal in an era still buttoned to the chin. With her silvery white hair, Cupid's bow lips, and sleepy-lidded stare, she redefined what it meant to be seductive. Long before Marilyn, before Jane, before the word bombshell had cachet, there was Jean. But behind that alabaster skin was a fragile young woman, one who would become the cautionary tale Hollywood tried to forget. In 1937, Jean Harlow was at the top of her game. Just 26 years old, with hits like Red Dust, Dinner at 8, and Bombshell, she had become MGM's golden girl. But off-camera, Jean battled chronic illness, rheumatic fever, kidney issues, and complications that were poorly understood at the time. Then came the fateful dental procedure. It was meant to be routine, an infected wisdom tooth, they said. But the extraction led to complications. There are rumors, quietly circulated among old MGM files and nurse confessions, that Jean underwent a form of reconstructive facial surgery, emergency, unsanctioned, and done in haste, to deal with swelling, sepsis, or nerve damage following the infection. Her appearance subtly shifted. Not enough for most to notice, but enough for those close to her to worry. Her once glowing skin began to look pallid. Her cheeks lost their flush. Some claimed the light had gone out of her eyes. Literally, they said. She didn't look like Jean anymore, one extra remembered. Her health declined rapidly. On set, she fainted often. During the filming of Saratoga, she struggled to walk, slurred her lines. Studio execs forced her to push through it, worried about delays, insurance, profits. But on June 7, 1937, Jean collapsed for the final time. She was rushed to the hospital. Acute kidney failure. It had spread through her body. She died within days. Her mother, a devout Christian Scientist, had refused early medical intervention. But many insiders believe the triggering event was the dental surgery, that it opened the floodgates to infection and, perhaps, through botched emergency surgical attempts, accelerated her decline. She was buried in a gown designed by MGM's costumers. Her casket was solid white marble, platinum in spirit. Jean Harlow didn't live long enough to become a legend by longevity, but in her brief life she was transformed by fame, by illness, by whispered operations done out of panic, not vanity. Her face, once worshipped, became her battlefield. Number 5. Lucille Ball, the queen of comedy with a crown of scars. Lucille Ball made the world laugh, but she herself was often holding back tears. To the millions who tuned in weekly to I Love Lucy, she was the dizzy redhead with perfect comedic timing and that infectious, cackling laugh. But behind the curtain, Lucille was a perfectionist, a studio mogul, and a woman living under relentless scrutiny, especially as the camera inched ever closer. She didn't enter show business to be a clown. Lucille had dreams of being a dramatic actress, serious roles, solemn scripts, black and white glamour. But her sharp wit and expressive face made her a natural for comedy. And in that shift, something deeper happened. Comedy became her armor, but aging, that was her enemy. By the 1950s, even as I Love Lucy soared, Lucy began to worry, not just about timing or scripts, but about the creases forming around her mouth, the gravity tugging at her jawline. She was already older than most of her ingenue peers, and in an industry that threw women away after 40, Lucille Ball was forging an empire, and she wasn't about to let a wrinkle undo it. So, quietly, she went under the knife. Unlike Joan Rivers or Phyllis Diller, Lucy never joked about her surgeries. She never confirmed them, but the evidence was there if you knew what to look for. In the late 50s and early 60s, subtle shifts began appearing on her face. Her jawline seemed tighter, her eyebrows subtly arched, her cheekbones more pronounced, yet smoother. Insiders close to Desilu Productions whispered of discreet facelifts, eye lifts, and skin-tightening procedures done during seasonal breaks. Just enough time to heal before the cameras rolled again. Lucy was meticulous. Her contracts demanded control over her lighting, her camera angles. She had final say over how she appeared on screen. She wasn't just protecting her image, she was producing it. She wasn't chasing youth for vanity. She was protecting her power, and that power came at a physical price. The most poignant part? In her later years, as her skin thinned and the surgeries began to settle in unnatural ways, Lucille became almost unrecognizable to some, not disfigured, but eerily preserved, a waxwork of a woman who once burned with comic fire. Still, Lucille Ball never faltered. She died in 1989, not just a star, but a mogul, one of the few women in history to own a major television studio. Her face, sculpted and smoothed over decades, was her mask, but her genius, it was raw, untouched, eternal. Number 4. Marilyn Monroe, the bombshell who built her face from scratch and hid the x-rays. She wasn't born Marilyn Monroe, she was born Norma Jean Mortensen, a quiet, curly-haired girl with a timid smile and eyes full of sky. What she became was a myth. But myths, as we know, are carefully constructed. Marilyn Monroe's face is perhaps the most iconic in 20th century history. That half-lidded gaze, those pillowy lips, the beauty mark, the golden curls. Perfection. Seemingly effortless, but that face, it was engineered. Behind the softness was surgical steel. By the late 1940s, Norma Jean was hustling her way through modeling gigs and minor roles, trying to stand out in a sea of starlets. She was lovely, yes, but not yet cinematic. Studio bosses whispered it. Agents hinted. Photographers cropped. Her jawline was too soft. Her nose too broad at the tip. Her cheeks lacked definition. She wasn't a sex symbol. She was cute. That would change. Around 1949 or 1950, just as her star began to flicker in minor roles, Marilyn underwent her first secret surgery, a chin implant. A small piece of cartilage, likely from her own body, was grafted to subtly elongate and define her jawline. The result was astonishing. Her profile transformed overnight, from round and girlish to poised and womanly. Not long after, she had a rhinoplasty, a slight nose refinement. It wasn't drastic. That was the brilliance of it. Just enough to create symmetry, to make the camera fall in love. There were whispers of more. Soft cheek reshaping, dental corrections, lip enhancements, none confirmed publicly during her lifetime. Because in Marilyn's world, beauty had to appear natural, as if the gods themselves had sculpted her. But the truth leaked out in shadows. In 2013, nearly 50 years after her death, medical files and x-rays from her plastic surgeon, Dr. Michael Gurdon, surfaced at auction. They confirmed what had long been rumored. Monroe had undergone at least 2 facial surgeries. The documents were dated, clinical, and damning to the myth of effortless beauty. But what they didn't capture was the why. Marilyn's self-worth was brittle. Behind the camera, she was riddled with anxiety. She struggled with abandonment, with fame, with her sense of self. She was constantly told she wasn't good enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not real enough. So she turned to the scalpel, to control something, anything, in a world where her body was always the commodity. Even in death, her secrets followed her. The medical records were reportedly stolen from Cedars-Sinai. For decades, their existence was denied, and when they emerged, fans were divided, some shocked, others unsurprised. Because deep down, everyone knew, no one becomes Marilyn Monroe without sacrifice. Her surgeries didn't destroy her. They completed her. They were the quiet architects of a legend, but they were also a testament to the cost of becoming a dream, when the dream was never real to begin with. Number 3, Frank Sinatra, the crooner who vanished into the operating room and returned, almost unrecognizable. He was the voice of a generation, the cool, lean silhouette with piercing blue eyes, cigarette in hand, and a voice that made women melt and men take notes. Frank Sinatra wasn't just a singer. He was a sensation. But even sensations, it turns out, look in the mirror and wince. As Old Blue Eyes aged, the crooner, who once reigned supreme at the Paramount Theater, found himself facing an unspoken enemy: irrelevance. By the late 1950s, rock and roll was emerging. Youth was currency. And Frank, he was watching the years write their signature across his face: sagging jowls, deepening lines, thinning skin. And Frank Sinatra was not going quietly into that good night. Enter the knife. Though Sinatra never publicly confirmed the procedures, insiders close to him, handlers, friends, makeup artists, knew. There were subtle but clear changes that began appearing after a brief disappearance from the public eye in the early 1960s. His jawline suddenly redefined. The bags under his eyes, once pronounced from decades of drinking, smoking, and sleepless nights, vanished. His neck tightened. Rumors swirled of a facelift, possibly more than one, to maintain the clean, youthful frame of his earlier days. The changes weren't drastic, but for someone like Frank, whose masculinity was defined by effortless cool, they were deeply calculated. He needed to stay in the game, not just for music, but for the films, the casinos, the Rat Pack image that had become a brand. Dean Martin was aging gracefully, laughing off his wrinkles. Sammy Davis Jr. leaned into eccentricity. But Frank wanted to remain untouchable. And the irony: his face may have held up, but his personal life unraveled. Divorces, affairs, rumored rage fits in front of mirrors. His pursuit of physical perfection echoed his hunger for control in every other arena. His performances, his friendships, his politics. One makeup artist from the detective set whispered to a journalist decades later he wanted the camera to love him again, so he changed the face it once fell for. And it worked. Partially. Sinatra's career roared back in the 60s, and he remained a symbol of old-school allure for decades. But look closely at photos from 1962 and compare them to 1957. The difference is undeniable. The crooner had cut into his own legacy, not to change who he was, but to preserve who he had once been. Number 2. Joan Crawford, the ice queen who faced the knife and her past with equal precision. She was the definition of a star. Those wide, hypnotic eyes, that mouth, painted with the precision of a war general, that posture, erect, regal, untouchable. Joan Crawford didn't enter a room. She took it. But behind the steely glamour, behind the arched brows and staccato speech, Joan was always at war. With time, with her past, and most of all, with her reflection. Born Lucille Fay LeSueur in Texas, Joan didn't rise to fame on charm alone. She was known to be ruthless, strategic, and obsessively controlled. And as the 1950s rolled in, so did something else: the slow decay of beauty. For a woman who had reigned through the silent era, survived the talkies, and reinvented herself in noir dramas, aging wasn't just a personal crisis, it was a professional death sentence. So Joan did what she always did. She fought back. Around 1953, Crawford underwent a facelift. Not a whisper of it was allowed to escape the MGM walls, of course, but those closest to her, maids, makeup artists, studio assistants, knew. Her face became tighter, her jawline more defined. Her skin, which had begun to soften and sag, appeared suddenly taut again. She paired the procedure with other subtle enhancements: dental work, skin peels, electrolysis, and rumored collagen injections, decades before they became commonplace. She wasn't trying to look young. She was trying to look invincible, but the surgeries couldn't save her from the very industry that had once worshipped her. As the roles dried up, Joan took whatever she could. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was not a comeback. It was a reckoning, a grotesque mirror to her own fears about decay and obsolescence. Behind the scenes, Joan kept mirrors covered in her home. She reportedly refused to be seen without full makeup, and she demanded soft lighting, always on set and in interviews. She had transformed her face into a mask, and when the cracks began to show, she doubled down. More lifts, more paint, more denial. But if Joan Crawford feared aging, she feared irrelevance even more. She once said, If you want to see the girl next door, go next door. She wasn't born to be relatable. She was born to be larger than life. And her surgeries, they weren't acts of vanity. They were weapons. Joan Crawford didn't just fight the system. She became it. And when it turned on her, she cut and stitched and peeled her way into legend. Number 1. Rita Hayworth, the star who changed her race for the silver screen. She danced like a dream, lit up the screen like a firecracker, and had a face so enchanting it became immortalized in pin-ups and war bunkers alike. But behind the dazzling facade of Rita Hayworth was a story of erasure, a transformation so extreme it wasn't just cosmetic, it was cultural. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino in Brooklyn to a Spanish father and Irish-American mother, she was raised steeped in Latin heritage. Her father, a flamenco dancer, trained her from the age of 3. By the time she was a teenager, she was already performing in nightclubs with a maturity far beyond her years. But when she arrived in Hollywood in the mid-1930s, the studios saw something they didn't like. Too ethnic, too foreign, too brown. And so the transformation began. Her hairline was moved. Literally, Rita endured painful electrolysis treatments to raise her naturally low Latin hairline, a common feature among her heritage. The process was excruciating, involving needle-like probes that destroyed hair follicles with electric currents. It took 2 years of steady treatment, 2 years of sitting still while parts of her identity were burned away. But that was only the beginning. Her name was changed from Margarita Cancino to Rita Hayworth. Her dark hair was dyed auburn red. Her skin was lightened in photographs, sometimes with makeup, sometimes in the printing room. She was taught how to speak in the mid-Atlantic accent favored by elite white Hollywood. Her nose was reportedly refined, subtly, surgically, to reduce the flare of her nostrils. Her eyebrows reshaped, her lips thinned with makeup to fit into the Eurocentric mold. All of it sanctioned, ordered, and paid for by Columbia Pictures president Harry Cohn, who was not only her boss, but a man obsessed with her reinvention. The goal? To make Margarita disappear. And the result? Rita Hayworth, the love goddess. She became one of the most bankable stars of the 1940s, with films like Gilda, CoverGirl, and Pal Joey sealing her status as a global sex symbol. Her image was painted on World War II bombs, pinned inside soldiers' lockers, splashed across Life magazine covers. But inside, the pain lingered. She once confessed to a friend, "They go to bed with Gilda, but they wake up with me." A simple statement, but haunting, because Gilda wasn't real, and neither, in many ways, was Rita. She struggled with identity her entire life. Multiple marriages, battles with alcohol, and a deep, aching loneliness that followed her until the end. Her transformation had been successful, but it came at the cost of her roots, her name, her skin, herself. Rita Hayworth didn't just undergo surgery, she underwent surgical erasure. Not for beauty, but for acceptance. And that is perhaps the most shocking surgery of all. Echoes behind the glamour. In the golden light of old Hollywood, we saw perfection, faces without flaw, bodies without time. But now, we know the truth. Each stitch, each incision, each silent appointment in a Beverly Hills clinic was a choice, sometimes brave, sometimes desperate, always human. Behind every lifted brow and sculpted chin was a deeper cut, a wound shaped by the fear of fading, of being forgotten, of being unseen in an industry that built people up just to carve them into something else. These stars were not weak for going under the knife. They were strong, resilient, determined to survive in a system that demanded the impossible. Their surgeries changed their faces, but their choices changed history. Because long after the stitches dissolved, their stories stayed. And now, you know them. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.